silence reigned across Sol. For 4 millennia, Earth held peace sacred, burying ancient weapons deep beneath Martian soil. Humanity forgot war. Then, aliens came. Zyran warships ripped open reality above colonies, snatching innocent youth from schools, beds, playgrounds. Screams echoed into void. Parents wept. Leaders pleaded. Alien commanders laughed, dismissing mankind as weak, domesticated apes. Big mistake. Deep inside dusty subterranean bunkers, old engines roared back to life. Peace died. Fury awakened. Ancient dreadnoughts broke atmosphere, carrying humanity's primal wrath towards stars. War has returned. Vengeance drives every engine. Innocence stolen means total annihilation for those who took it. For 4,000 years, humanity had been the galaxy's quietest neighbor. Following the catastrophic resource wars of the 22nd century, the remnants of mankind forged the Terran Coalition, a society entirely devoted to philosophy, agricultural abundance, and scientific pursuit. The United Earth Charter explicitly outlawed the construction of offensive weaponry. When humanity eventually pushed outward into the cosmos, they did so in unarmed exploration vessels, planting colonies on fertile worlds and greeting alien civilizations with open arms and open ledgers. They were traders, artists, and diplomats. In the eyes of the sprawling interstellar empires, humanity was a harmless, somewhat naive species, a flock of sheep grazing peacefully on the edges of the Orion Cygnus arm. New Eden was the crown jewel of these frontier agricultural worlds. Governed by Administrator Abigail Foster, the planet was a verdant paradise of rolling amber fields and crystal-clear lakes. It lacked defensive planetary shields or orbital defense platforms because, according to human logic, they had no enemies. The Kalan hegemony exploited this logic. It happened on a crisp Tuesday morning. School teacher Sarah Jenkins was leading her class of 30 primary school students through a botanical garden in the settlement of Providence. The sky, usually a brilliant azure, suddenly tore open. There was no warning klaxon, no declaration of war, just the deafening roar of displaced air as 3 Kalan dreadnoughts, massive obsidian spearheads spanning miles across, dropped out of slipspace directly into New Eden's lower atmosphere. The Kalan hegemony was an ancient, sprawling empire built on a cruel biological necessity. Their species suffered from severe genetic degradation, rendering their own neural pathways rigid and brittle. To run the complex biocomputational arrays that managed their vast fleets and planetary infrastructures, they required neuroplasticity. They required developing brains. They required children. Hundreds of Kalan dropships descended like a swarm of metallic locusts. Abigail Foster watched from her administrative office as the ships bypassed the planet's power grids, ignored the communication hubs, and landed directly in the center of civilian population zones. "Administrator," yelled Jacob Miller, the head of local constabulary, bursting into her office. He was armed only with a standard-issue stun baton, designed for breaking up tavern brawls, not repelling an interstellar invasion force. They're ignoring the government buildings. They're landing at the schools, the pediatric hospitals, the residential sectors. Abigail's heart plummeted. She rushed to the observation window just in time to see Kalan shock troops towering, insectoid bipeds clad in heavy kinetic armor marching out of their dropships. Down in the botanical gardens, Sarah Jenkins tried to shield her students. "Stay behind me," she screamed, her voice cracking as a Kalan soldier approached. The alien did not even raise a weapon. It simply backhanded her with a massive armored gauntlet, sending Sarah flying into a row of glass greenhouses. She collapsed, her vision blurring, ribs shattered. Helplessly, Sarah watched as Kalan extraction units deployed stasis nets. The nets enveloped the children, little Tommy, who loved drawing spaceships, Clara, who had just lost her first tooth. The children's screams were cut short as the stasis fields activated, freezing them in mid-terror. The Kalan soldiers methodically loaded the paralyzed children onto gravity sleds. Jacob Miller arrived with his small security detail, charging the Kalan lines with stun batons and non-lethal riot gear. The aliens didn't bother shooting them. They simply walked through the human security forces, swatting them away like gnats, crushing bones and shattering spines with casual indifference. In less than 45 minutes, the operation was over. The Kalan dropships recalled to their dreadnoughts. Abigail Foster staggered out into the streets of Providence. The silence was absolute, save for the agonizing wails of parents and the crackle of burning foliage. The Kalan ships vanished back into the void, leaving New Eden intact. They didn't destroy the cities. They didn't burn the crops. They had simply taken the harvest they came for. Over 80,000 children gone. The transmission from New Eden reached Earth hours later. Inside the Grand Assembly in Geneva, President Jonathan Hayes sat in a state of catatonic shock, watching the security footage play on the massive holographic displays. Around him, the representatives of humanity wept. 4,000 years of peace. 4,000 years of disarmament. And this was the reward. How many? Hayes whispered, his voice trembling. 82,416, replied Secretary of Defense Leonard Cole. The title was an antiquated one. Cole's job was primarily disaster relief and coordinating asteroid deflections. President Hayes, we are receiving similar reports from 6 other frontier colonies. The Kalan hegemony has struck simultaneously across the sector. Total estimated captives. And over 500,000 children. Have we established contact? Hayes demanded, slamming his fist on the polished mahogany desk. Ambassador Richard Cross managed to open a narrow-band channel to the Kalan Grand Vizier, Cole said, pulling up a secondary display. The image of a Kalan official appeared. Its mandibles twitched in a gesture that translation software identified as profound amusement. Terran Coalition, the Grand Vizier's synthesized voice echoed through the chamber. Do not distress yourselves. Your offspring are being repurposed for the glory of the hegemony. Their neural tissue will power our navigational arrays for generations. Be grateful they serve a higher biological purpose. You are a docile, unarmed species. Do not attempt to follow us. Any interference will result in the orbital bombardment of your home world. Continue your farming. We will return in 30 of your years for the next harvest. The connection severed. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the Grand Assembly. The aliens' arrogance was a physical blow, a stark reminder of humanity's total vulnerability. They had abandoned the sword to worship the plowshare, and in doing so, they had offered their own children up to monsters. But Jonathan Hayes was a student of history. He knew the secrets that the Terran Coalition kept buried deep beneath the utopian facade. Mr. President, Cole said softly, we have no ships. We have no weapons. Our planetary police force relies on chemical irritants and stun nets. Hayes stood up slowly. The trembling had stopped. A cold, terrible resolve settled over his features. He looked at the assembly, then turned to Cole. 4,000 years ago, humanity signed the Treaty of Unification. We agreed to disarm. We agreed to dismantle the war machine. Hayes paused, his eyes narrowing. But the men who signed that treaty were veterans of the resource wars. They knew the universe was dark and full of terrors. They knew peace was a luxury, not a universal law. Hayes walked over to a secure terminal embedded in the assembly's central podium. They didn't destroy the ships, Leonard. They just put them to sleep. With a series of biometric scans and a cryptographic key passed down from president to president for 40 centuries, Hayes accessed a subroutine in the global defense grid that hadn't been pinged since the dawn of the Coalition. Initiate Project Tartarus, Hayes commanded. Across the Sol system, alarms that had never been tested began to howl. Deep beneath the crushing, icy oceans of Europa, colossal titanium blast doors groaned open, displacing millions of tons of water. Inside dry docks the size of cities, the old fleet waited. Dreadnoughts forged in humanity's most savage era, built not for exploration, but for absolute, uncompromising slaughter. In the asteroid belt, Entire, hollowed-out planetoids split apart, revealing the sleek, predatory silhouettes of destroyers armed with kinetic mass drivers and nuclear payloads. The flagship, the Wrath of Achilles, a vessel 3 miles long and bristling with railgun batteries, powered up its fusion reactors. On Earth, artificial intelligences locked in deep freeze containment for millennia were awakened. These were not the friendly logistics AIs that ran Earth's traffic grids. These were battle minds, cold and calculating algorithms designed solely to optimize the annihilation of enemy fleets. Humanity had not fought a war in 4,000 years, but they were about to remind the galaxy exactly why they had to lock their weapons away in the dark. The transformation of human society was instantaneous and terrifying. In less than 72 hours, the utopian pacifists shed their gentle demeanor. Billions of citizens watched the footage from New Eden. The sight of Sarah Jenkins bleeding on the ground, the image of paralyzed toddlers being hauled away like cargo, triggered something primal, something deeply ingrained in the human genome that had been suppressed for millennia. The Terran coalition was dissolved. In its place, the United Terran Empire was declared. Military recruitment centers opened on every corner. People who had spent their lives studying poetry, engineering, and agronomy lined up by the millions. There was no time for standard boot camp. Veterans of highly realistic historical combat simulations, gamers who had spent decades mastering tactical warfare in virtual reality, were immediately drafted and given command of gun batteries and fighter squadrons. Admiral Harrison Graves, a brilliant but previously marginalized historian who specialized in ancient human naval tactics, was pulled from a university on Mars and given total command of the resurrected fleet. He stood on the bridge of the Wrath of Achilles, staring out at the armada assembling in the void. 3,000 warships, all bristling with archaic but devastating weaponry. No energy shields, no plasma blasters, just thick, ablative armor, nuclear warheads, and hypervelocity kinetic penetrators. Admiral, the ship's AI, a terrifyingly calm voice named Ares, spoke through the bridge speakers. Navigation calculations are complete. Space-time metric adjustment aligned for jump to Kalan hegemony border space. On the tactical screens, the FTL jump required calculating the proper time distortion across a localized gravity well, represented by the rigorous relativistic metric. Delta, tau égale, int, s, curt, je, mu, nu, frac dx, mu, d, lambda, frac dx, nu, d, lambda, de, lambda. Execute, Graves ordered. Take us to Kael'Zar. 30 light-years away, the Kalan hegemony outpost of Kael'Zar orbited a dying red dwarf. It was a massive orbital fortress, serving as a staging ground for the hegemony's expansion fleets. Commander Corvin, a veteran Kalan officer, was casually reviewing the inventory reports from the recent human harvest. The neural yields from the children were exceptional. The humans were truly a magnificent biological resource. Suddenly, Kael'Zar's spatial sensors screamed in alarm. "Commander!" A sub-officer chattered, mandibles clicking in panic. "Massive spatial anomalies detected directly outside our perimeter. It's a fleet, unregistered signatures," Corvin scoffed. "Pirates? Or perhaps the Tresselans making a border probe. Raise deflector shields and charge the plasma casters." Space tore open, not with the elegant, silent flash of modern Kalan slipspace drives, but with a violent, radioactive rupture. 3,000 human warships slammed into real space, their engines burning with the angry, dirty fire of raw fusion. Corvin stared at the visual feeds. These designs, they are primitive. They don't even have energy shielding. Who are they? Before the sub-officer could analyze the signatures, the human fleet opened fire. They did not send a diplomatic hail. They did not issue a demand for surrender. They bypassed all civilized rules of interstellar engagement. The Wrath of Achilles fired its primary spinal mount. A tungsten slug, weighing 400 tons, was accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light. It struck the Kalan fortress's deflector shield. Kalan shields were designed to dissipate superheated plasma and disperse directed energy weapons. They were not designed to stop a solid block of metal moving fast enough to crack a moon. The kinetic energy transfer was catastrophic. The shield shattered like glass. The tungsten slug punched clean through the reinforced hull of Kale Zar, traveling through 30 decks of Kalan engineering and habitation zones, and exited the other side, carrying thousands of Kalan bodies out into the vacuum of space. Corvin was thrown from his command throne as the fortress violently depressurized. "Return fire! Return fire!" he shrieked. Kalan plasma batteries lashed out, scoring direct hits on the human vanguard ships. But the old Terran dreadnoughts were built with 3 meters of dense, polarized armor plating. The plasma scorched the hulls, melting the outer layers, but the ships absorbed the punishment and kept advancing. Hundreds of human destroyers unleashed swarms of nuclear missiles, a technology the rest of the galaxy had abandoned centuries ago as too volatile and uncivilized. Thousands of atomic detonations blossomed in the dark, blinding Kalan sensors and bathing the enemy fleet in localized EMPs and searing radiation. In less than 20 minutes, the impregnable fortress of Kale Zar was a burning graveyard. The Kalan defense fleet was utterly vaporized. Admiral Harrison Graves watched the burning wreckage of the alien station from his bridge. His face was a mask of cold stone. He thought of the terrified children ripped from New Eden. "Ares," Graves said, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the command deck. "Transmit our logs to Kalan High Command. Let them see what they woke up. Humanity had been peaceful, but they were born in fire. And now, they were going to burn the hegemony to the ground." The destruction of Kale Zar sent a shockwave of panic through the Kalan hegemony's secure neural.com network. For a millennium, the hegemony's military doctrine had been built on elegant energy dispersion, surgical plasma strikes, and the absolute technological superiority of their biomechanical processors. They had conquered dozens of star systems without ever engaging in a prolonged war of attrition. They simply did not comprehend the sheer, blunt force trauma of human warfare. Deep within the command sanctum of the Kalan capital world, Grand Vizier Corvash stood before a holographic projection of the Terran invasion force. The data streaming in from the border outposts made no logical sense to the Kalan tactical algorithms. Intercepted Kalan tactical report. Enemy vessels lack standard thermal dissipation fins. They do not employ gravitic deflector shields. Incoming projectiles register entirely as solid kinetic mass. Attempting to parse structural integrity. Analysis failure. The enemy is using reinforced armor plating measuring meters in thickness. Their vessels are not designed for evasion. They are designed to absorb catastrophic damage and maintain trajectory. "How are they moving so fast?" Corvash demanded, his mandibles clicking in frustrated staccato. Their drives emit immense, wasteful radiation. It is barbaric. They are utilizing controlled nuclear detonations for propulsion and weaponry, Grand Vizier, replied Subcommander Thal, his exoskeleton trembling slightly. Our point defense arrays are calibrated to intercept concentrated plasma bolts. They cannot track or vaporize thousands of solid tungsten shells simultaneously. The humans are overwhelming our defensive grids with sheer volume. Worse still was the data package Admiral Harrison Graves had transmitted after the fall of Kale Zar. It was a terrifying archive of human history. The Kalan leadership watched, horrified, as they witnessed archived footage of the Somme, the firebombing of Dresden, the nuclear annihilation of the resource wars, and the brutal, grinding trench combat of the 21st century. The Terran coalition had not been a pacifist civilization because they lacked the capacity for violence. They had embraced peace because they were intimately, terrifyingly good at war, and they feared their own nature. By stealing their children, the hegemony had shattered the cage humanity had built for its own inner monster. Back on the front lines, the Terran fleet did not pause to celebrate their victory at Kale Zar. Admiral Graves ordered the armada to fracture into hunting packs, aggressively penetrating hegemony space. Their primary objective, Intercept the Kalan transport convoys carrying the 80,000 children from New Eden before they reach the central processing worlds. Captain Silas Montgomery, a former orbital construction foreman who now commanded the heavy cruiser Ironclad, led one of these hunting packs. His task force tracked the warp signature of a massive Kalan transport vessel, the Resplendent Harvest, escorted by 4 heavy plasma frigates. Target acquired, Captain, reported Lieutenant Gregory Harmon from the sensor station. They are attempting to spool up their slipspace drives for a micro-jump to evade us. Not today, Montgomery growled, gripping the edge of the tactical console. Divert auxiliary power to the forward railguns. Fire a wide dispersion shrapnel net across their projected flight path. Shred their drive coils. The Ironclad shuddered violently as the massive magnetic accelerators along its spine discharged. Instead of a single solid slug, the railguns fired thousands of dense, jagged, depleted uranium fragments. The shrapnel cloud tore through the void at blinding speeds, slamming into the Kalan escort frigates and the rear engine block of the transport. The alien vessels, expecting targeted energy blasts, were entirely unprepared for a localized kinetic sandstorm. The fragile, highly advanced slipspace coils of the Resplendent Harvest ruptured bleeding exotic particles into space and leaving the massive ship dead in the water. The 4 escort frigates, their hulls riddled with thousands of microfractures, depressurized and spun out of control. Transport engines are offline, Harmon confirmed. They are drifting. Bring us alongside, Montgomery ordered, his voice cold and flat. Prepare the boarding torpedoes. We are getting those kids back. In the launching bays of the Ironclad, hundreds of soldiers strapped themselves into heavy boarding pods. They wore bulky, pressurized zero-G combat armor, carrying weapons that belonged in a museum but had been hastily retrofitted for vacuum combat. Massive, pump-action combat shotguns firing explosive slugs, heavy rotary cannons, and serrated trench knives. To breach the reinforced hull of a Kalan vessel, the human engineers relied on shaped charge physics, maximizing the explosive yield using the precise explosive cavity formula. $V equals pi r, 2h, left 1, frac, rho e, rho m, right c dot, eta $, where $V represented the penetration volume, $rho e the density of the explosive, and $rho m the density of the hull material. The math was flawless. The execution was brutal. Dozens of boarding torpedoes slammed into the obsidian hull of the Resplendent Harvest. The shaped charges detonated in perfect synchronization, blowing massive holes through the Kalan armor. Sergeant Arthur Pendleton was the first out of his pod, racking the slide of his combat shotgun as gravity normalized within the alien corridor. "Check your corners! Thermal vision on!" Pendleton barked over the squad comms. The Kalan Internal Security Forces, tall, elegant warriors wielding precision energy pikes and plasma carbines, rushed to repel the boarders. But they were fighting a kind of warfare they had never seen. A Kalan warrior fired a plasma bolt, melting a hole straight through a steel bulkhead. Pendleton didn't retreat. He simply stepped through the smoke and fired his shotgun at point-blank range. The explosive slug bypassed the alien's kinetic absorption field entirely, blowing the insectoid creature backward in a spray of iridescent blue blood. "Push forward!" Pendleton yelled, as the human Marines flooded the corridors, moving with a brutal, terrifying efficiency. They used flashbang grenades, a concept utterly alien to the Kalan, blinding their multifaceted eyes and rupturing their auditory sensors. They fought dirty. They fought fast. Within 20 minutes, Pendleton's squad breached the central cargo bay. The sight made the veteran soldiers freeze. Thousands of human children, frozen in stasis pods, were stacked floor to ceiling in massive, glowing hexagonal racks. But the victory was short-lived. A Kalan sub-commander stood on a raised platform overlooking the bay, his hand hovering over a biometric terminal. "Halt!" The alien synthesized voice boomed through the chamber. Your primitive weapons are useless here. The stasis matrix is tethered to the vessel's primary fusion core. One command, and the core will overload. Your offspring will be incinerated along with this vessel. Pendleton's heart hammered against his ribs. It was a hostage situation, a biological shield. The Kaelin were desperate. "Stand down, Sergeant." Montgomery's voice crackled over the comms from the ironclad. "We cannot risk the children." The Kaelin commander's mandibles clicked in triumph. "You humans are flawed. Your emotional attachment to biological waste renders your tactical advantages obsolete. Drop your weapons." Pendleton slowly lowered his shotgun, but he didn't drop it. He smiled grimly behind his visor. "Captain Montgomery, did Ares complete the handshake?" "Affirmative, Sergeant," Montgomery replied. "The ghost is in the machine." The Kaelin commander looked confused. Suddenly, the biometric terminal beneath his hand sparked and went dead. The glowing hexagonal racks holding the children shifted from a hostile red to a soothing, neutral green. The human battle AI, Ares, had not simply been calculating firing solutions. Since the ironclad had closed the distance, Ares had been aggressively injecting viral scrap code into the Kaelin's local network. The Kaelin operating systems, built for elegant bioprocessing, had no defense against thousands of years of human malware, brute force hacking, and logic bombs. "Your reactor is locked out, Bug," Pendleton said, raising his shotgun once more. "And so are your blast doors." Before the Kaelin commander could react, a volley of explosive slugs tore the platform apart. The human Marines secured the cargo bay, establishing a defensive perimeter around the sleeping children. "Captain," Pendleton reported, his voice shaking slightly as he looked at the thousands of innocent faces frozen in the stasis pods. "We have the package. The kids are safe." On the bridge of the ironclad, Captain Montgomery exhaled a breath he felt he had been holding for days. But as the manifest data streamed in from the captured transport, his relief turned to ice. "Sergeant Pendleton," Montgomery said heavily. "The manifest. It only lists 8,000 units." Down in the cargo bay, Pendleton looked around the massive chamber. "Where are the rest of them, Captain?" "They split the convoy," Montgomery replied, his voice darkening. "The rest of the children from New Eden. They're already at the Kaelin core worlds. They're at a planet called Xylar Prime." Xylar Prime was not just a planet. It was an industrial organ of the Kaelin hegemony. Its surface was completely encased in layers of biomechanical architecture, churning out the processors, synthetic organs, and neural matrices that kept the sprawling alien empire functioning. It was a fortress world, heavily defended by orbital defense platforms and an elite armada of Kaelin dreadnoughts. It was also the final destination for over 400,000 kidnapped human children. Admiral Harrison Graves brought the full, terrifying might of the Terran Armada out of slipspace at the edge of the Xylar system. 3,000 human warships formed a massive, unbroken wedge, their hulls scarred from dozens of skirmishes, their weapon batteries hot and ready. This was no longer a rescue mission. This was a siege. "Admiral," the AI Ares intoned, its voice echoing on the bridge of the Wrath of Achilles. "Xylar Prime's defensive grid is absolute. They possess layered gravitic shielding and localized spatial distortion fields. Kinetic bombardment will be highly inefficient. Furthermore, life signs indicate the human captives are housed in subterranean bunkers beneath the primary processing foundries." Graves stared at the tactical display, his hands clasped behind his back. "If we crack the planet, we kill the children." "Correct, Admiral," Ares replied. "Then we don't crack the planet," Graves said, his eyes narrowing. "We blind them, we deafen them, and we take it on the ground." Initiate operation. Falling rain. The Terran fleet did not charge the Kaelin orbital defenses. Instead, they deployed something far more insidious. From the missile tubes of hundreds of destroyers, thousands of dull, unpowered canisters were launched into the void. They didn't register as threats to the Kaelin sensors. They had no heat signatures, no active guidance systems. They were simply drifting debris. But as the canisters crossed the threshold of Xylar Prime's gravitational pull, they activated. They were autonomous electronic warfare platforms, packed with high-yield EMP generators and signal jammers. As they detonated in the upper atmosphere, a cascading wave of electromagnetic radiation washed over the planet. The Kalen's elegant biocomputational arrays, so advanced and delicate, suffered massive feedback loops. The orbital defense platforms shuddered as their targeting algorithms crashed. The planetary shields flickered and died. "Shields are down," Ares reported. "The door is open." General Harmon. Graves spoke into his secure channel. "The sky is yours." In the troop bays of the human fleet, General Gregory Harmon stood before 50,000 Terran shock troops. They were not wearing the bulky void armor used in boarding actions. They wore sleek, heavily articulated, powered exoskeletons, painted a matte, light-absorbing black. They were the descendants of the orbital drop shock troopers of the 22nd century. "Listen to me!" Harmon roared, pacing the deck. "Down there is a meat grinder. The bugs have entrenched positions, heavy plasma artillery, and a million angry soldiers who think we are nothing but cattle. But underneath all that armor and arrogance, they are holding our children. They broke the long peace. Now, we break their world." The soldiers slammed their fists against their chest plates in unison, a sound like a thunderclap echoing through the bay. "Get to your pods," Harmon ordered. "We drop in 60 seconds." The sky above Xylar Prime filled with streaks of fire as tens of thousands of human drop pods plunged through the atmosphere. The Kalen anti-air batteries, still reeling from the EMP strikes, fired blindly into the sky. A few pods were vaporized, but the sheer volume of the drop overwhelmed the defenses. The pods slammed into the metallic surface of the planet with seismic force. The explosive bolts blew the hatches, and the human infantry poured out into the sprawling alien industrial complexes. The ground war for Xylar Prime began with unprecedented savagery. The Kalen attempted to establish defensive lines using their towering, shielded infantry mechs, but the humans employed rapid, decentralized guerrilla tactics. They moved through the labyrinthine factory floors like ghosts, using shaped explosive charges to bring massive structures crashing down on Kalen columns. They utilized sniper teams equipped with magnetic accelerator rifles, taking out Kalen commanders from miles away, bypassing their localized shields entirely. Grand Vizier Corvash watched the catastrophic collapse of his planetary defenses from the central command spire of Xylar Prime. He was trembling. The humans were not just fighting, they were adapting. Every Kalen tactic was analyzed, countered, and turned against them in a matter of hours. "Activate the neural resonance emitters," Corvash ordered frantically. "Sweep the planet. Burn their minds." The Kalen's ultimate weapon was not physical. The towering communication spires across Xylar Prime shifted frequency, emitting a powerful, localized psionic broadcast designed to overload the neural pathways of any invading species. It was a weapon of absolute terror, designed to induce catastrophic hallucinations, paralyzing fear, and eventual brain death. Down on the surface, General Harmon's troops suddenly staggered. Men dropped to their knees, clutching their helmets as a searing, high-pitched whine ripped through their skulls. Tactical alert. AI Ares. Warning. Massive neurological interference detected. Enemy is utilizing localized frequency bombardment to induce severe psychological trauma and neural degradation. But the Kalen had made a fundamental miscalculation. They had assumed the human mind was like theirs, rigid, orderly, and susceptible to chaotic disruption. They did not understand the inherent chaos, resilience, and compartmentalized trauma of the human psyche. Furthermore, they did not anticipate Ares. The human AI immediately interfaced with the neuro-helmets of the human soldiers. Instead of trying to block the signal, Ares flooded the human comms network with algorithmic white noise, aggressive heavy metal music from the 20th century, and rhythmic, grounding biometric feedback loops. General Harmon forced himself to stand, his vision blurring, a trickle of blood running from his nose. The alien terror broadcast was trying to force images of despair and death into his mind. Harmon gritted his teeth, his anger burning away the psychic fog. "Is that all you've got, you ugly bastards?" he spat, raising his heavy rotary cannon. "All units, push through the interference. Focus on the music. Advance on the primary spire." The human forces roared, a collective scream of defiance that seemed to shake the very foundations of the alien city. They charged through the psychic bombardment, their heavy weapons tearing into the Kalan defensive lines. High in the command spire, Corvash watched the monitors in utter disbelief. The resonance emitters were operating at maximum capacity. Any other species in the galaxy would have been reduced to catatonic husks. But the humans were simply getting angrier. "They are not just a biological resource," Sub-Commander Thal whispered, watching the black-armored soldiers slaughter their elite guard. "Grand Vizier, we did not awaken a sleeping prey." Thal looked at the data files the humans had sent, the history of their endless, brutal, self-inflicted wars. He finally understood the terrible truth. "We opened the cage of an apex predator," Thal said, his voice void of hope, "and we gave them a reason to hunt us." The heavy blast doors of the command sanctum shuddered as explosive charges were planted on the other side. The siege of Xylar Prime was nearing its end, and the Terran Empire was just getting started. The reinforced biomechanical blast doors of the Xylar Prime command sanctum did not just open, they were violently atomized. The human combat engineers had applied a highly volatile thermobaric breaching gel, a chemical compound explicitly banned during the Terran Resource Wars for its tendency to ignite the very oxygen in the air. General Gregory Harmon stepped through the settling cloud of superheated dust and vaporized alloy. His black-powered exoskeleton was scorched with plasma burns and streaked with the iridescent blue blood of Kalan elite guards. Behind him, 24 Terran shock troopers fanned out into the cavernous, vaulted chamber, their heavy rotary cannons and magnetic accelerator rifles sweeping the room for targets. Grand Vizier Corvash stood behind a shimmering, localized gravitic shield at the center of the command dais. Beside him, Sub-Commander Thal's mandibles clicked in a frantic, terrifying rhythm. They were surrounded by the opulent, organic architecture of their empire, now plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the harsh, red glare of emergency bioluminescence and the targeting lasers of human weapons. "Hold your fire," Harmon barked over the external speakers of his suit. The rotary cannon spun down with a menacing whine. Corvash drew himself up to his full 8-foot height, attempting to project the divine authority of the hegemony. "You have breached a sovereign command spire of the Kalan Empire," the Grand Vizier's synthesized voice echoed, though it lacked its previous arrogance. It sounded strained, bordering on panic. "Your primitive insurgency ends here. If you strike me down, the entire sector fleet will descend upon your insignificant worlds and burn them to glass." Harmon slowly walked up the steps of the dais, the heavy footfalls of his armor echoing in the quiet room. He stopped inches from the Kalan's gravitic shield. "We've already mapped your sector fleets," Corvash, Harmon said, his voice a cold, gravelly rasp. "Admiral Graves is currently turning your relief armada into orbital debris out in the asteroid belt. You don't have a military left in this system. Turn off the shield." "You do not understand the forces you are tampering with," Corvash pleaded, shifting his tactic from threats to negotiation. "We can offer you technology, cures to your biological frailties. We can elevate your species. The neural harvest is a necessity for the survival of our civilization. We can replace the units we took. We will clone them for you." The silence that followed was heavier than the gravity of a dying star. Inside his helmet, Harmon closed his eyes. The alien was talking about human children as if they were spare parts crops that had been reaped and could simply be replanted. "Units," Harmon repeated softly. He raised his left arm, engaging a wrist-mounted, high-frequency plasma cutter, a mining tool repurposed for close-quarters butchery. "Ares, what's the frequency of this shield?" "Modulating to match Kalan gravitic frequencies now, General," the AI's crisp voice replied in Harmon's ear. You have a 3-second window of phase alignment. Harmon didn't hesitate. He thrust his armored arm forward just as the shield flickered. The plasma cutter ignited, punching straight through the barrier and impaling Corvash through his lower thorax. The Grand Vizier shrieked, a horrifying mechanical sound. As the shield collapsed entirely, Corvash dropped to his knees, clutching the smoldering hole in his carapace. Sub-Commander Thal immediately dropped his weapons and raised his upper limbs in universal surrender. "Do not kill me," Thal chattered rapidly. "I have the encryption keys to the subterranean matrix. The children, if you cut the power, the matrix will flood their stasis pods with neurotoxins. It is an automatic failsafe." Harmon withdrew his blade, stepping over the gasping Corvash. He grabbed Thal by the armored collar, lifting the massive alien off the ground. "Explain," Harmon growled. "They are already connected," Thal cried, his multifaceted eyes wide with terror. "The 100,000 subjects processed on this world. They are not in cold storage. They are wired into the planetary synaptic engine. If your artificial intelligence continues to attack our mainframe, the engine will trigger a hard reset to protect itself. It will purge the biological components. It will burn their brains." Harmon dropped Thal and activated his global comms. "Admiral Graves, do you copy?" High above in orbit, Harrison Graves watched the tactical map on the Wrath of Achilles. The Kalan defense fleet was in ruins, but the ground situation had just drastically complicated. "I hear it, General." Ares confirmed the sub-commander's claim. "Analyzing subterranean power fluctuations," Ares replied. A complex schematic of Xylar Prime's crust appeared on the bridge monitors. "The alien is telling the truth. I am detecting massive biological electrical activity 3 miles below the surface. Over 100,000 unique human neural signatures are integrated into a closed-loop system. If I execute the Stuxnet Alpha protocol to shut down the planetary grid, the backlash will fry the children's central nervous systems. Stand down all cyber warfare routines targeting the lower grid," Graves ordered immediately. He gripped the railing of the command deck. The Kalan hadn't just taken hostages. They had woven them into the very fabric of their planet's survival. To kill the planet was to kill the children. "General Harmon," Graves said, his voice heavy with the weight of command. "We cannot hack our way out of this, and we cannot bomb it. You have to go down there and unplug them manually." "Understood, Admiral," Harmon replied. He looked at Thal. "Congratulations, Bug. You just volunteered to be our tour guide. Take us to the nursery." 3 miles beneath the metallic crust of Xylar Prime lay the synaptic engine. It did not look like a server farm or a traditional power plant. To the human soldiers of the 104th Vanguard Division led by Captain Lewis Carter, it looked like a descent into hell. The walls were made of a synthetic, fleshy resin that pulsed with a slow, sickly heartbeat. Thick, translucent cables filled with glowing blue fluid snaked across the floor and ceiling, carrying immense amounts of data and biological energy. The air was hot, humid, and smelled sharply of ozone and sterile copper. "Keep your arcs tight," Captain Carter ordered. His plasma rifle raised as his squad moved through the biological labyrinth. "Watch for automated defenses, and watch your step. Don't sever any of these primary arteries." They had Thal secured with heavy magnetic restraints, walking ahead of them. The alien sub-commander flinched at every shadow. "The defense matrix in this sector is automated," Thal whispered. "It operates on instinct, not logic. It will protect the core at all costs." Carter's squad pushed through a final set of fleshy, membranous doors and emerged onto a massive circular gantry overlooking a chasm. The soldiers froze. Several men gasped. One soldier immediately turned away, vomiting inside his helmet. Below them lay the nursery. It was a cavernous dome easily 2 miles across, suspended in the air by thousands of glowing, umbilical-like cables were hexagonal pods. Inside each pod, floating in an amber, translucent fluid, was a human child. There were hundreds of thousands of them. Their eyes were closed, their faces slack, but their heads were encased in horrific, biomechanical helmets that drilled directly into the base of their skulls. They were not sleeping. They were processing. They were being used as biological CPUs for an alien empire. "Dear God," Carter whispered, his heart shattering against his ribs. He had fought in the brutal urban pacification simulations of old Earth. He had studied the darkest chapters of human history from the gulags to the concentration camps, but nothing had prepared him for the sheer, cold industrialization of human innocence. "Ares," Carter choked out over the comms. "We have eyes on the subjects. They're wired in." "I see them, Captain," the AI replied. It's usually flat tone tinged with a digital heaviness. "I am scanning the synaptic network." The children are caught in a massive forced computation loop. They are solving complex slip-space navigational equations while simultaneously managing the hegemony's agricultural logistics. The cognitive load is immense. We must act quickly. I am detecting microhemorrhages in several subjects. "How do we cut them loose?" Carter asked, moving to a nearby control terminal. "We cannot simply pull the cords," Ares explained. "The Kalen network is a gestalt consciousness. It is holding on to the children's minds. If we sever the physical connection, their consciousness will remain trapped in the digital void, resulting in immediate brain death. We need to introduce a localized sedative into the network, a digital anesthetic to put the system to sleep so we can extract the hardware safely." "Then do it," Carter said. "I cannot, Captain," Ares replied. The Kalen firewall in this specific sector is entirely biological. It rejects raw code. It only accepts commands formatted through a living neural pathway. "I need a bridge." Carter stared at the terminal. It wasn't a keyboard. It was a gelatinous orb surrounded by sensory needles. "You need a human mind to carry the virus," Carter realized. "You need someone to plug in." "Yes," Ares confirmed. "I must inject the Prometheus sequence into a human volunteer. That volunteer must interface with the Kalen terminal and actively push the code into the Gestalt. Be warned, Captain. The human mind is not designed to handle the data flow of an entire planetary network. The psychological and neurological strain will be catastrophic. The volunteer may not survive." "I'll do it." Corporal Nathan Briggs stepped forward, a young engineer barely out of his 20s. "Stand down, Corporal," Carter ordered, his voice brooking no argument. He unlatched his helmet, letting it hiss as the seal broke. He pulled it off, breathing in the foul, metallic air of the alien engine room. "I'm the commanding officer. I give the orders, and I carry the weight." Carter approached the gelatinous terminal. He looked at Thal, who was watching him with a mixture of awe and horror. "You humans are irrational," Thal murmured. "To sacrifice a fully developed biological unit for incomplete, immature ones, it contradicts all evolutionary logic." "That," Carter said, his eyes hard and cold, "is why you lost this war the moment you touched our kids." Carter plunged his bare hands into the gelatinous orb. Immediately, the sensory needles darted forward, piercing the skin of his wrists and palms, seeking nerve endings. The pain was sharp, electric, and instantaneous. "Ares," Carter grunted, his jaw clenched as blood trickled from his hands. "Hit me!" Ares transmitted the Prometheus sequence through the comms network directly into the interface node, Carter screamed. His physical surroundings vanished. He was suddenly drowning in an ocean of screaming data. He felt the terrifying, crushing weight of the Kalen Gestalt, a cold, ravenous hunger that consumed thought and spat out logic. He felt the terror of 100,000 children, trapped in a nightmare where they were forced to endlessly assemble puzzles that burned their minds. "Push!" Carter told himself, his physical body seizing as blood began to run from his nose and ears on the gantry. Push the fire. He visualized the Prometheus virus as a burning spear, and he drove it into the heart of the alien network. He fed it with his own rage, his own memories of old Earth, the ferocious, untamed spirit of a humanity that refused to be subjugated. Inside the digital void, the cold, orderly Kalan logic shattered. The Prometheus sequence acted like a neurotoxin, replicating through the alien servers, singing the system to sleep. On the gantry, the glowing cables connected to the children's pods suddenly shifted from a hostile, pulsing red to a soft, dimming blue. The mechanical hum of the massive chamber spun down into silence. The release latches on the pods clacked open in unison. The biomechanical helmets disengaged, retracting from the children's skulls. Carter collapsed backward, tearing his hands free from the terminal. Briggs caught him before he hit the deck. Carter was convulsing. His eyes rolled back, his breathing ragged. "Medic!" Briggs screamed, holding his captain. "Get a medic down here now." "Captain Carter's heart rate is stabilizing," Ares reported over the comms, a trace of relief in the synthetic voice. The Prometheus sequence was successful. The local network is dormant. The children are safe to be moved. Across the sprawling chamber, human medics and engineers poured in, breaking open the pods and gently lifting the unconscious, shivering children out of the alien fluid. Tears streamed down the faces of hardened soldiers as they wrapped the kids in thermal blankets. General Harmon stood on the command dais above, listening to the reports. They had done it. They had cracked the fortress and saved the children of Xylar Prime. But as he looked at the planetary data streaming into his tactical pad, the victory turned to ash in his mouth. "Admiral Graves," Harmon said, his voice quiet. "We have the children. The count is exactly 112,000. "Good work, General," Graves replied, though his voice was tight. "Begin the extraction. Load them onto the medical frigates immediately." "Admiral," Harmon interrupted, "New Eden lost 80,000. The other colonies lost over 400,000 combined. That's over 500,000 children." Harmon looked at the data screen, his blood running cold. "Where are the rest of them?" There was a long, terrible pause on the comms. When Graves finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of an executioner. "We just decrypted the navigational logs from Corvash's command console," Graves said. "Xylar Prime was just a processing hub, a testing ground. The vast majority of the children, over 400,000 of them, were shipped directly to the heart of the hegemony." "Where?" Harmon asked. "Kalan Gath," Graves replied. "The imperial capital world, the home of their emperor." Harmon looked down at his scorched armor, then at the Kalan sub-commander, Thal, who was trembling on the floor. Humanity had broken 4,000 years of peace. They had shattered a fortress world, but it wasn't enough. They hadn't just woken up the monster, they had remembered how to be the monster. "Ares," Harmon said, racking a fresh drum of explosive slugs into his rotary cannon. "Tell the fleet to spool up the fusion drives. We aren't going home." Kalan Gath was not merely a planet. It was a monument to biological supremacy. The imperial capital world was surrounded by the Aegis Sphere, a lattice of orbital defensive rings that bristled with thousands of heavy plasma lances and gravitic distortion generators. At the center of this impregnable web sat Emperor Vorshan on the obsidian throne, a ruler whose genetic lineage had remained unbroken for 10 millennia. Vorshan watched the tactical hololiths with a mixture of disgust and cold curiosity. He had received the fragmented transmission from Xylar Prime. The humans had not only breached a fortress world, but they had managed to decouple a closed-loop synaptic engine without triggering the fail-safes. It was an impressive feat for a species that still relied on controlled explosions to propel their vessels through the void. "Emperor," spoke Fleet Commander Kale Rath, his exoskeleton gleaming in the dim emerald light of the throne room. "The Terran Armada has entered the system perimeter. They have formed a standard wedge formation. They are severely outnumbered. The home fleet consists of 10,000 advanced interceptors and 500 capital ships." Vorshan's mandibles clicked in a slow, rhythmic pattern. "They are running on emotion, a fatal biological flaw. Let them crash against the Aegis Sphere. Once their primitive kinetic weapons are depleted, we will capture their officers. Their adult neural pathways are hardened, but they will serve adequately as localized agricultural subprocessors." At the edge of the Kalan Gath system, the Terran Empire's fleet held its position. The wrath of Achilles drifted in the silent vacuum, its heavy armor scarred and blackened from the siege of Xylar Prime. Admiral Harrison Graves stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the glowing sphere of alien defenses on the tactical monitor. "Admiral," the AI Ares spoke, its voice carrying an evolutionary sharpness it had lacked before interfacing with the Kalan network. "The Aegis sphere is impenetrable to standard kinetic bombardment. Furthermore, Kalan Gath's planetary shield is drawing power directly from the planet's molten core. A direct assault will result in a 94% casualty rate for our fleet. I have no intention of fighting them on their terms, Ares," Graves replied coldly. He turned to his communications officer, Lieutenant Peter Winston. "Bring up the remote feeds for the Anvil." The Anvil was not a warship. It was a massive, automated asteroid mining rig that the Terrans had quietly towed from the Kuiper Belt during their mobilization. It was 6 miles long, composed of solid iron and nickel, and strapped to its rear were 12 super-heavy fusion drives salvaged from destroyed Kalan dreadnoughts. "Ares," Graves said, "calculate the trajectory. Target the central magnetic conduction node of the Aegis sphere's southern polar ring." "Trajectory locked, Admiral. Engaging remote override." The Anvil did not enter the system at normal combat speeds. Driven by the salvaged, overclocked alien engines, the massive iron asteroid was accelerated to a significant fraction of the speed of light. It became a relativistic kill vehicle, a weapon of such terrifying, indiscriminate, destructive power that the Terran coalition had banned even the theoretical mathematics of it centuries ago. On the Kalan capital, warning sirens that had not sounded in thousands of years suddenly wailed. "Emperor!" Kael Rath shrieked, watching the sensors blind themselves trying to track the incoming anomaly. "Massive kinetic signature detected. It is bypassing our localized spatial distortions." Before Vorshan could issue an order, the sky above Kalan Gath turned a blinding, impossible white. The Anvil struck the southern polar ring of the Aegis sphere. The kinetic energy released was equivalent to 1,000 thermonuclear detonations. The invincible orbital ring shattered, sending millions of tons of superheated shrapnel cascading into the upper atmosphere. The resulting electromagnetic shockwave ripped across the planet's southern hemisphere, overloading the core-tethered planetary shields and plunging half the Imperial capital into darkness. The impregnable fortress was suddenly cracked wide open. "All ships," Admiral Graves commanded, his voice ringing with absolute chilling authority. "The door is open. Pour in." 3,000 Terran warships surged forward, their railguns and missile batteries firing in terrifying synchronization. They ignored the Kalan defense fleet entirely, relying on their thick armor to absorb the plasma fire as they dove straight through the gaping hole in the Aegis sphere. Down in the troop bays, General Gregory Harmon loaded a fresh magazine of depleted uranium slugs into his rotary cannon. Beside him stood Captain Lewis Carter, his hands still heavily bandaged from his interface at Xylar Prime, holding a heavy magnetic accelerator rifle. "This is the end of the line, boys," Harmon roared over the deafening hum of the drop pods. "The Emperor of this bug-infested rock is sitting directly above the primary stasis vaults. We drop in, we tear the roof off his palace, and we bring our children home. No quarter given, none expected." Thousands of black drop pods rained down through the burning skies of Kalan Gath, crashing directly into the opulent courtyards and gilded spires of the Imperial Palace. The final battle for humanity's future had begun on the Emperor's front lawn. The Imperial Palace of Kalan Gath was a sprawling biomechanical cathedral, built to reflect the perfection of the hegemony. Within 20 minutes of the orbital drop, its halls were painted with iridescent blue blood and choked with the smoke of high explosives. Sergeant Arthur Pendleton kicked down the reinforced doors of the grand vestibule, firing his combat shotgun at point-blank range into the chest of a Kalan royal guard. The explosive slug blew the alien warrior backward, clearing the path for the rest of the 104th Vanguard Division. "Push forward!" Captain Carter yelled, his voice raw. "Ares is tracking the children's life signs. They are 50 levels down. directly beneath the throne room. Do not let them initiate a lockdown. The Kalan elite forces fought with desperate, fanatical fury. They employed psionic weaponry that caused the air to shimmer with crippling headaches and hallucinations. But the Terran shock troopers, driven by a wrath that transcended biological pain, refused to break. They moved with terrifying mechanized efficiency, their powered exoskeletons shrugging off glancing plasma blows as they carved a path straight to the heart of the Empire. General Harmon led the breaching team to the massive obsidian doors of the Emperor's sanctum. "Set the thermobaric charges," Harmon ordered. "Blow it wide." The explosion vaporized the doors and the first 4 rows of Kalan defenders inside. Harmon strode through the fire, his heavy rotary cannons spinning up. Emperor Vorshan stood before his throne. He was not cowering. He held a glowing, crystalline staff, the central control node for the palace's synaptic network. "You savage, unevolved beasts," Vorshan hissed, his synthesized voice echoing through the chamber. "You think you have won? The 400,000 units beneath my feet are tied to my neural signature. I crush this staff, and their stasis pods flood with neuroacid. Lower your weapons, or watch your future burn." The human soldiers froze. Carter gritted his teeth, his grip tightening on his rifle. It was Xylar Prime all over again. Harmon did not lower his weapon. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. "You really don't understand who you're dealing with, Vorshan. You think you're holding a gun to our heads. You're not. You're just holding a detonator. Ares," Harmon said softly over the comms. "Execute the Trojan." Vorshan laughed, a harsh clicking sound. "Your artificial intelligence cannot penetrate my personal neural link. It is a biological impossibility. It would be," Ares' cold voice suddenly spoke, not from the human comms, but from the crystalline staff in Vorshan's own hand. "If I had not used the data extracted from Sub-Commander Thal at Xylar Prime to map your specific genetic frequency," Vorshan's multifaceted eyes widened in sudden, absolute terror. The staff in his hand shifted from a brilliant gold to a sickly, corrupted red. "I am not hacking your network, Emperor," Ares continued. "I am overwriting your DNA signature." The crystal staff shattered violently in Vorshan's grasp, driving jagged shards of glass into his manipulators. The Emperor fell to his knees, shrieking in pain. Beneath the palace, the localized locking mechanisms on 400,000 stasis pods clicked open. The children were safe. Harmon walked up to the kneeling Emperor. Vorshan looked up, his mandibles trembling. We only wanted to survive," the alien gasped. "Our minds are rigid. We are dying of stagnation. We needed your spark." "You wanted our spark?" Harmon asked, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. He raised his heavy pistol and aimed it squarely at the Emperor's head. "You just caught the whole fire." Harmon pulled the trigger. The hegemony ended with a deafening crack. The extraction took 3 grueling days. Massive human transport ships, escorted by heavily armed destroyers, landed directly in the ruins of the Imperial Palace. 400,000 children, bewildered, crying, but alive, were gently loaded aboard. Soldiers who had spent the last week butchering aliens with cold precision wept openly as they carried sleeping toddlers up the boarding ramps. When the last transport broke orbit, Admiral Harrison Graves looked down at the smoldering ruins of Kalan Gath. The galaxy was watching. Every interstellar empire, every federation, and every syndicate had seen the live feeds of the Terran Empire's wrath. They had seen an unarmed species of peaceful farmers construct an armada of nightmares in 72 hours, cross the void, and completely annihilate the oldest, most powerful military force in the sector. Graves opened a broad-spectrum, unencrypted channel to the entire galaxy. "This is Admiral Harrison Graves of the United Terran Empire," his voice echoed across the stars. 4,000 years ago, we buried our weapons because we knew the destruction we were capable of. You mistook our mercy for weakness. You stole our future." He paused, letting the silence hang in the void. "We have our children back. We are returning to our borders. Do not follow us. do not test our skies. Because if a single human life is ever taken by the stars again, we will not stop until the galaxy is entirely empty. Graves out. The fleet jumped into slipspace, leaving behind a broken empire and a galaxy permanently terrified of the sleeping giants they had so foolishly awoken. Did this tale of humanity's awakened wrath and unyielding determination leave you on the edge of your seat? The universe thought mankind was weak, but they quickly learned that breaking a 1,000-year peace is the deadliest mistake an alien empire could ever make. If you loved this gritty HFY sci-fi drama, please hit that like button. It helps us bring more epic stories straight to your screen. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans and let them witness the true power of the Terran Empire. What was your favorite moment of the siege? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our next thrilling interstellar adventure. Stand strong, keep exploring, and remember, humanity always fights back.